GMGM fam, today is Friday, March 21st, 2025. It's the first day of the rest of our lives, and we are thrilled to be spending it with Zack Guzman as well as Rex. Zack Guzman, you perhaps know from Coinage. Rex, you may know from other Leviathan live streams. And me, you probably know from that guy who's like sleeping under the bridge. But we
No,
are.
we know you as the only guy in this industry who wears a suit.
I'm trying to put little phi back in DeFi. No. The suit's simple. When I started wearing it, curve price was going up. When I stopped wearing it, curve price went down. So I'm going back to the suit. We'll see what happens. We got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. First, just wanted to plug last week's QR code here. Was Frax Finance, but it might be going away because there was an auction that expired just this morning. Some heated bidding that went on. We don't yet know who's going to get the QR code for next time, but next week's Squid Pass has been transferred from IQ.ai to, I believe it was Fig, probably pushing rings. He might be pushing, it's his pass, so he can do whatever he wants with it. He's a busy guy. He's also got Paladin. He's got a ton going on. So just be on the lookout for that. For the time being, though, the guest of honor today is Zack Guzman. Zack, for those who aren't aware, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me on. Good to be on with you guys. I'm the founder of Coinage and Trustless Media, trying to pioneer community-owned media in the world of Web3. And the idea of starting with a crypto show, so that's what Coinage is anybody can mint an NFT to co-own us as a legal DAO co-op based in the US. The first NFT project to pay a distribution back to NFT holders with a path towards patronage dividend. So we're doing a lot of people talk about read, write, own in Web3, but we're trying to pioneer read, watch, own in a way where the own piece of that is legitimate and real. And there's a lot we can get into, but super stoked to be here with you guys.
Yeah, let's actually start with that because it's fairly close with what we've been trying to build with Leviathan. This kind of like we're approaching it from different angles because we're like focusing on this like distributed consensus around like what is news. But it's like very much the same thing. Like there's so many amazing people in Web3, and I feel like you're just trying to give like a bigger piece to the community, right?
Yeah. Well, I also, by the way, shout out, love what you guys are doing. We use Leviathan now in our own token gated Telegram. Love the blast. We've submitted some stories through you guys. I'm sure that gets distributed to y'all's members too. And so it's kind of it's cool to be working with you guys on it. And honestly, like just as much, I'd love to interview you on like kind of what you guys are working on too, because yes, with what we're trying to do is the same thing as consensus and bringing together differing views and opinions and biases to create more objective fact and also realign incentives. My background's in traditional media coming from CNBC and Yahoo, and now to have the co-founder of Netflix be one of our backers and involved in Coinage with us, I think it's cool to create a new model where you break down the wall between people reading content and people making content to let them co-own it together. And that's what Coinage is trying to pioneer. And we're on year 3. Just crossed 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. We won our Play Button Award, as you said, and then we immediately tokenized it with a meme coin. And so we're throwing ourselves into the arena. It's been a fun experiment that we just dropped this week. And so yeah, every day is new at Coinage. Every day is an experiment with all of our members, and it's been fun.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, congratulations on 100,000. I think we're only 999,000 behind you, but dude, that's huge. And I think, earlier this week we were having a discussion essentially around like the bullishness of like trying to figure out how to use crypto to actually use it as a tool to do something in the world, as opposed to just like, let's just create crypto and hope people want to speculate on it. And because other people want to speculate, like we can get rich off of it. Like, I think that's kind of played out and has led us to this like slump that we're in. But I'm just so bullish on like people that are saying like, what can we do with these new like primitives and these new ideas around like decentralization and community ownership and that kind of stuff. So I would love to hear just like a little bit of the detail, like, what does this mean? Like community ownership, like how do you see this as like kind of like a actually new thing that somebody like the co-founder of Netflix would like want to advise or invest in versus just like kind of like doing news and then separately like in a not related way, just like issuing tokens and NFTs and shit and then like calling it a day?
Well, it's a great question. And I guess I need to remind myself I'm speaking on a show that might be more technologically advanced than a lot of the other ones I talk to because they already know like how this stuff works. But I don't know. For me, it's just been really fascinating because I've been covering crypto for years, and at CNBC in 2018, I actually pitched the idea of doing a crypto show and got laughed out of the room. Back then, they're like, "It's not a thing. It's not going to be a thing. It's never going to be a thing." And I was like, "Well, I think you might be wrong." And so went to Yahoo and started going deeper. Interviewed a lot of the big names at the time, and then saw NFTs blow up and saw a Constitution DAO blow up and was like, okay, wait a minute. It's not just like number go up anymore. Like communities are being built that you can tokenize online. And that's unlocking some pretty crazy things. Like, I don't think anyone ever thought that like friends could come together and raise $40 million to buy a replica Constitution. And like I participated in that. And it was like a really cool learning experiment for everybody at the time. And we just interviewed the co-founder of that project, Constitution DAO, and Coinage just a little bit ago, and like kind of got him to reflect, to your point, Rex, on like meme coins now, and are they any better at community building than like what Constitution DAO did back then with the Fair launch? And it's a very interesting discussion. But I think technically with like the way that it works is my background and like having gone through that experiment or experience, basically being told no as a creator who had an idea. What we're trying to show is that like, okay, if you're a creator who does have an idea, like tapping into that, like following, no matter how small it might be, like to align interest and be like, hey, look, I need some funds to get off the ground. Like, let's pool our resources and like, let's do this. Like, that's where Coinage started, right? Like everyone who mints, all the money goes into the DAO treasury, and we use those funds to produce Coinage and cover the space. And I think it's really cool because, I was kind of on an island covering the space. No one, as I'm sure you guys know, like can be, and kind of, I think why you guys are doing what you're doing, like no one can be an expert in everything in covering crypto. And so like you might have a guy who knows stable coins, you might know a guy that like knows NFTs or like, whatever it may be. And so like what we're trying to build is like a hive mind of like anyone can own a piece of Coinage. And when I say own a piece, I mean like we are a registered cooperative for a reason. So we became the first NFT project in the US to pay a distribution back to NFT holders. And I can say that we have a legal path to patronage dividends because we're a legal co-op based here in the US. And so we've set this model up to where mint your NFT, become a legal member, and entitle yourself to that. And I think that model is like real ownership in a way that's not like, to your point, let's have a bunch of tokens that might go up, might go down. And I could be wrong. So like we also just launched our meme coin experiment with like, hey, is that what people want on Solana? Maybe. Do they want real ownership on ETH? Maybe. Like, let's see how this plays out. And so I don't pretend to have all the answers. I'm just a content creator who like had an idea for a show that now like people seem to be putting their money into to like co-own with me. And I think that's been like the most fun experience of doing this is that like, content and like media online, I think everyone knows is broken. Like traditional media is dying.
Yeah.
And how can we help creators do what they're doing and doing better than like the old model? And I think that's why Coinage is here.
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak on behalf of Garrett here, but like the founding story for Leviathan was essentially Garrett and I were in the like semi-private chat, and I was just like, if someone just like summarize everything we're talking about and put it in a news service, like that's something I'd pay for. And like that's not exactly what we're doing here, but it is kind of like the next evolution. And I think, the story for Leviathan is similar to what you just said, which is like, we don't really know what we're doing, but like we're trying and we're like throwing, pasta at the wall to see what sticks. And I guess it's just good to see someone like 4 years ahead that like, oh my God, stuff does stick.
I mean, I hope. I mean, we are 4 years ahead. I don't know if like it's a tricky thing. It's like, how do you want to measure this stuff, right? It's like, do you want to measure it by like a token price? Do you want to measure it by like distribution? Like, and you guys have done a great job at that. Like, clearly we're putting our own stories into your guys' distribution now. And so it's like everyone kind of can tackle. That's what I love about crypto is like everyone's building transparently in the open, and like everyone can tackle these things using like whatever model they think works best. But I think like, again, the real players in the space are all like coming from a place of belief that, like this technology that Web3 can enable better outcomes for people. And that's like something that I keep going back to as we like straddle ETH and Solana now. It's just like there's so much like tribalism in this space, but it's like if you really like believe in it, you just want to see it win, right? Whatever that looks like, I think. And so I just hope that someone figures it out. If it's not us, hope it's you guys. If it's not you guys, hope it's somebody else. But like I think it's really fun to see all these Web3 media experiments like starting now, because like the space, to your point, Rex, has been like so starved for like where's the real use cases. And that was our main bet when we started 3 years ago. It was like eventually there would come a time where people wanted this technology to like actually do something. And I think like there have been examples along the way that have shown what can be done around community building, around a shared mission. And like NFT projects in 21 were kind of like, I don't know, we raised a lot of money, but we don't really know what we're doing here. We like the art. But like now it's like, okay, now we're getting into chapter 3, I think, of like, okay, let's build around a shared mission and community. And that I think is where this gets very interesting.
Yeah. Could you talk a bit about this legal structure that you put in place around Coinage? Because you mentioned that you're like on a path, or like I think you said you're on a path, so it's like a work in progress, but where you're going to be able to like share dividends legally with people who purchase the Coinage NFT. Like, what does that look like? Did you have to register with the SEC? Did you have to register with the CFTC? I mean, like it's so opaque that like huge kudos for actually walking that walk.
Well, you're wading me into territory that my lawyers are always like, hey, be careful whatever you say. But I can speak directly to
I hear
the
sirens in the
experience.
background.
Yeah. I can speak to the experience of like where the idea came from candidly, which was back in Yahoo. I was talking with a bunch of people and was like, hey, I think Web3 is onto something in terms of it not just being like Web2 was all about like there's money and there's attention, but like those two things don't intersect. And like in Web3, it's like clearly I think everyone now sees like no, like with what meme coins, for better or for worse, they've shown like attention is monetizable like in a different way on the internet. And so it's not just money, it's like attention and money interacting together. And so like there are certainly like regulated securities offerings you can go to like fund things, but like at the time I was like that doesn't really capture in the way that Web3 like it doesn't capture interoperability. You can't launch something where your community can interact with like other communities or like build on top of other things. And so like we didn't want to go that route because like that's not what I raised for. And like there are still a lot of laws that like lock people out. Like as a accredited investor, you like take Trump's thing. You can't participate in World Liberty Financial. And it's like, why? Like, is that fair? Like, I don't think so. And I think a lot of people in crypto would say no too. And so like we didn't want to go the accredited investor route. And so then it's like, well, what paths are there around what we might want to do in crypto? And so we explored a few, and this is the coolest part I think about having built what we built is like cooperatives have been around for a really long time. Like REI is a cooperative, right? You go there, you patron the store, you shop, and you get a dividend, like a check at the end of the year for being a member. And people don't really understand that like when you have a cooperative, like it's a different structure. And I think that that's really cool in terms of like we chatted with lawyers. We wanted to build here. A lot of people have like offshore entities to build tokens and stuff. And like we just wanted to figure out like a way to build community here in the US. And so the legal team that we set everything up with is actually like the same legal team that Eat Denver uses. And like they've also been pioneering this idea of like, can we build the ability to like have structure in place that like is not going to change from like one administration to the next, which I think is another fear for like everybody building in this space. So like, I guess, Garrett, to your question, it like took a really long time and a lot of effort to like figure out like, where can we do this? Like, how would we set this up? And so that's the way that we've structured it. And I think, we've landed on something that has like given us the defense, which by the way, that the advice for people out there would be like, if you're trying to build in this space, as we've seen with other projects, like if you don't set things up properly from the beginning, you might find yourself in trouble, not just like from a regulatory perspective, but like questions that you might not have been prepared for. And like I take the Libra token as a good example of like that kid who's like, when he got asked by Dave Portnoy, like, whose money is it? And he's like, I don't know. So maybe you should have thought about that. And so like,
to be clear, I think he knew that it was his money. He just didn't want to admit it.
Yeah, and I never wanted to be in that position. So like when we launched, it was like, okay, let's think about this. Let's set this up. And I mean, I don't know how deep you guys want to go, but like when I raised, we raised like a production company like Trustless Media, because like my whole idea is like, okay, let's start with what we know. I was a crypto reporter, so we launched Coinage as our first proof of concept to show like how you could do this. But we've launched other entities now too, like Best Dish Ever is a food show with food creators and their fans co-owning it. And we want this model to win. And I think, we've done the hard work to figure it out, but it's just one model to go with. There's plenty of other experiments and there's plenty of other ways to go, but that's kind of like why we went the way we did.
Damn. Okay. I'm like so much more interested right now because it's one thing for like crypto native people who are doing crypto content to like have a crypto idea and like, I don't know, let's make a meme coin. Let's see if it works. Like, great. Right. But like our brains are already broken by this. Like the fact that you're starting to say like, okay, there's something here that works for crypto people. Let's take the model that seems to be working and start to apply it outside of like this incredibly small group of people that are already like man, like I'm starting to think of what you're doing. Like if you really have like a cooking show where people can like buy NFTs to be co-owners of that because they believe in it, like maybe don't even really understand what an NFT is, and like, man, you're onboarding for us.
Yeah. Oh, I think, again, you can tackle these things from a lot of different directions. And it's really just like the whole idea is like, how do you want to realign incentives, I guess, is the idea. That's why I like Web3. Like my background before I was a journalist was behavioral economics and like the idea of incentives. Dan Ariely, actually, like one of the father of behavioral economics, like one of our Coinage NFT holders as well. And so like it's just kind of like it's a fun thing to think about. And like as a creator who got laughed out of the room in 2018, was just like, I know this is a good idea. I just don't have like the funds. I don't have like at that time I had like way fewer followers, and like I'm certainly not an A-list celebrity by any means. But like this is the idea. Like look at what independent media has done. Like look at Substack, and look at the rise of Web 2 and like Instagram. It's like you can amass a huge following, but like the 1,000 fan theory and like Web 3 is like really good at letting creators like monetize in different ways and go deeper into their fan base and like shared interests. Even Instagram knows they have a problem, by the way. Like they've been experimenting with like broadcast channels. It's like you have all these people who follow you. If you're a food creator, you've attracted a huge audience of people who love food, but like there's no real way to interact with them and no real way to co-own anything that like you're building together. And so you're just a passive subscriber. You're kind of a simp, just like clicking like, or you're subscribing. But like when we crossed 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and like where this new experiment we just launched came from, was like, well, if we're community owned DAO, like we just won this thing, but it's not mine. It's like the Coinage DAOs. And like, well, then how should we celebrate with our community? And it kind of came organically. It was like, well, maybe we should tokenize this moment. And like, what does that even mean, tokenize this moment? And so like, it's been fun to kind of play around with. Yeah, that's the one, the play button token. I guess if I'm supposed to be better at shilling these things. But in the episode, which now has become a series, we're walking through like how these things get launched. And, full disclaimer, in episode 1, I'm like, look, this is also an experiment. I'm not going to tell anyone to buy this, but I can transparently say, like, it's been really fun to show like how meme coins launch and like where the money goes in the liquidity pool, and like, learning about all that stuff. And like we can talk about, happy to talk fully transparently about everything. And like that by itself, like when people were like, oh, you're a Docs team and you're launching a meme coin, and like this should be huge. I'm like, just because I said I am who I say I am, like that's the crazy bar that exists in meme coin land, I guess. And like it's been wild, man. So like happy to get into that too, but it's a ride.
Garrett, I'll let you like kind of take the conversation where you think is appropriate, but I just wanted to like cue back on one thing that you said, which is in Web 2, like you have attention and you have money, and those things are like different. And I would just rephrase that to say in Web 2, like in life, attention is money, right? But in Web 2, where how that dynamic works is that your attention is monetized by someone else. And like what we're trying to do is say like, it's your attention. You're the one providing value. Like there should be mechanisms for that value to flow back to you.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, again, it's just like kind of realigning incentives and shared passion. I think that's kind of like what we're trying to explore too, is like, how can you unlock the shared passion of a community? We actually had, I think it sounds like based on the opening of the show that you guys were talking about like ads that people can buy and like the ad spot, like we floated that too. We're not as technically savvy as I think Leviathan is. And so like, I think it's a great idea. It was like one that we like originally toyed around with, and we're like, I don't know. So it's cool to see it in the wild, because like that was something that we thought about too. And yeah, I just think that like to your point on like the platforms and stuff, it's just like that's a common theme. Like, the narrative of like people getting canceled, deplatformed, or whatever is like how can you set these things up to where things like that doesn't happen? How can you fix trust in media if it's at an all-time low? And so, like, again, I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. I think it's cool anytime anyone in this space tries to do something real that's not just like buy low, sell high. Like what we saw with GameStop and like what happened in, I think that was 21. Like when a community came together, like small little fish, Davids took on Goliath in like meme coin, like meme stock at that point, meme stock trading, because they were in a Reddit group. Like that showed to me the power of community, not just attention, but community online to like build something around like, hey, we're powerful together. And that was a moment that like, as a traditional like markets journalist, was like as eye-opening as Constitution DAO was.
Yeah.
The narrative matters, and the narrative matters, and if you own the narrative together, I think that that's a very powerful thing too. So like that's what Coinage is trying to explore too.
For sure.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and bring it back to the community in just a second. But first, I wanted to plug the community. We got about 500 people watching this live on X, which is awesome. But Zack already said we need to get to like 1,000 true Web3 people. So everyone take a second to retweet it, share it, send it to your mom, send it to your dad, send it to your cousins, and anyone in your extended family. Let's see if we can get that up to like 50,000, maybe 500,000 could be our stretch goal. And then Zack, you're asking a bit about the auctions, and I think what we should do is we should after we get off, we should talk about how we could host some on your behalf, because we've been doing this with a few other content creators. Last week we auctioned off the Waj Pass for Wajahat Mughal, who's like an amazing content creator, a doctor turned educator in the space, and he sold it for 15,000 squid. So he's producing a video on behalf of Yield Nest with them. So it was like a pretty fun experience for him. And we've been just experimenting with like weekly auctioning off some of our ad inventory. And this morning there was a pretty furious bidding war. As mentioned earlier, it was the great Feig from.
This is so sick to see actually in the wild, man. This is cool. Congrats,
Garrett. The bidding war was between me and myself.
It still counts, man.
It still counts. Yeah, that's by
it's
the way,
still
that's
a war.
I did not realize I was the last person to bid, so I bid again.
We were just,
I think at the end,
we were just floating as a very, very similar idea to this. So like, oh, maybe we could work together with you on this. I think this is really sweet.
Yeah, I mean, the contracts are open source, so feel free to just take them and like run with it as you please, or we could just set it up in your behalf. But we took the idea from the Llama's auction. So the Llama's NFT project did this like really fun series a couple of years ago where they auctioned off like 1 llama per hour for like a week, and it was the most fun thing because at that time the bear market was just like 1 year old. Now we're at year 3 of the bear market, so we needed a bit more juice. So we turned this on, and we've been having a lot of fun with it. We should be releasing the next batch of auction contracts this week. So based on the feedback from kind of the first rounds we've been running, we figured out some cool additional features we can build into it. It's all extensible, it's all upgradable, and it's all decentralized. So it's we're doing the walk in terms of like keeping Leviathan structured around like a multi-sig, which we're eventually going to be pushing off to squid holders. So lots been going on there. We'll point you all to articles about that. But getting back to the community, the great DeFi advisor, who's like frequently on a lot of these shows, and feel free to pop on if you are around and available, had a question just asking, and I think you kind of covered this, but maybe just elucidate this a little bit more clearly for him. Is Coinage basically about allowing ownership or versus Leviathan News, which is trying to go more for participation and ownership? So I guess like the question would be, if you're like watching Coinage, like you can do that passively, right? You can just be like, hey, I like this, I'm going to buy an NFT, get some revenue, or dividends or whatever it's called, but I'm not going to like have to like actually like sit there and like work to get these dividends. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on which NFT you have. So like when we launched, it was a question of, again, let's use the Patreon example. It's like our subscriber NFT we launched when we did our first interview with Do Kwon, which was like kind of what put Coinage on the map. It did 2 million views, and it won a Cebu Award along with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that year. So it's something we're like pretty proud of. And it got...
Was this a pro Do Kwon or anti Do Kwon interview?
It was just a Do Kwon interview. It was so he hadn't talked about the collapse in what was that? I don't know if it was in the summer, but he hadn't talked about it since the collapse happened. And so we wanted to highlight it. And so it was just, I mean, it was cited in the case that was brought against him. So I suppose if you look at it from that perspective, it was anti. But it was really just to get the facts out. So anyways, we launched that. And we could have just put it out on YouTube and like got a bunch of attention that way, but we posted the trailer, and then we launched an NFT that people could mint to watch first, and we made it free. And so I thought that was really cool because it was just like us committing to the idea of like, what's the value here really? And like we made the bet that building a community on chain would be more valuable than like the money we could just bring in around this like piece that we produced. And like that was a bet at the time because like we wanted a community that like would be decentralized and like start that way. And now like after that we've like continued to expand, and now we have like close to 7,000 Coinage NFT holders in our community. And yeah, it's been super fun. So like those ones are just to unlock the content, but then the other tiers, the way that Coinage works is we've kind of copied the US, like the House of Congress, and like the way that everything we're kind of governance nerds. But like there's only 5,000 caucus NFTs, which are like the lower ownership tier. And then there's 1,000 of the higher ownership tier, and like that's split 50-50. And so like if you buy an NFT, you become a member in the co-op, and like that's the way that it's structured. And there's like 2 ownership tiers. But if you just want to be a passive subscriber and just like, you know, mint a subscriber NFT to unlock the content, that money goes into the DAO, just like the money from the other 2 ownership tiers go to the DAO. And it's just, again, it's a really cool way to like meet your fans, your watchers, your content, like consumers, like where they want to be. Maybe you're a super fan. Maybe you want to actually like be involved, then become a member. Maybe you just want to watch, and that's totally fine too. But I think that like it's something that like Patreon right now doesn't offer. It's mostly just like, hey, I want to support you by like paying you, but I don't get any upside. And like the cool thing about Web3 is like as we grow an audience, we can sell more ads, we can do other things, and like that way you grow with us rather than just like passively sitting there as you know, someone who smashes a like button. So it's a little bit.
So oh, go ahead, Garrett. Do you have something?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna double click a bit more on this Do Kwon question, because this was before my time. Like I got started following Coinage just about like 6 months ago, and really been a fan of everything you've been doing. Is River, who's a part of our community. He has like when he heard about Coinage, he was like, he felt that it was inappropriate to be giving Do Kwon a platform. And you kind of addressed this already with him in the chat, but I'm curious for people who might have that critique about like this idea of platforming controversial people, like what your take on that is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a tricky thing, and like I definitely would not platform certain people. This was a case where it was like, okay, something happened. There was a collapse. And he hadn't spoken with anybody yet. And so it was like a question of like, can we get his take on the record? And I think there's incredible like journalistic value to that. And again, it wouldn't just be like, hey, like think about what happened, by the way, with Libra token, right? Like what happened when that all played out? It was like the guy came on, he posted his own video, and then he like went around, and like the CoffeeZilla interview was also pretty crazy. But it's like, you know, these things played out on video, and like playing out on video is like a very different thing. And like we are mostly like a video production company at Trustless. Like that's kind of like the idea is we focus on video. My background's in video. And so like with that, it was like, let's put out a piece. You can put it on video. Everyone can kind of like see everything and make their own call. And like that was kind of the idea. So it was less like platforming someone at a time where like the full details weren't out there yet. And so like, let's hear the details. And like, by the way, we spent like 3 days editing it. I like called all-nighters and like slept on the floor of our studio to like make sure we don't include anything that we already factually knew was not the case. And like that was part of like some of the controversy too. It sounds like, by the way, might be pretty foreign to crypto people that maybe don't edit full like podcasts, is that like the editing process is also like partially needed to like take out bits that like aren't real or aren't true. And so like people attacked us for like, hey, there's so many cuts in this thing. And it's like, yeah, because like a lot of it is completely off, not actually part of the story. And so like, I don't know. I think it was a very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of things I would do differently. Like I got attacked for smiling too much in that piece because like a lot of people lost money. I lost money, so like it's not like I just generally smile. It's like kind of the way that I interview people, and like it was a wild experience. It was in Singapore, and so like there's a lot of different things. But like I think the main point is that like again it gets to this point of trust, and what's been really fun as a journalist with this new model is that normally people will attack you for being biased, and you have no recourse. Like there's no way to defend your honor as a journalist to be like, I'm not biased. And to be fair, everyone has biases. And so like, what's the solution? The only solution is like build a community owned show where anyone with their biases can co-own us and tell us like, no, that's wrong, or this is right. And you land somewhere on objective fact. And like at the time we hadn't even launched. So like there was not that. And it's been really cool to see the evolution of like people who still might have an issue with like anything we put out, and they critique us. And then in the replies, it's like, hey, look, we're the only out you can co-own, and like change if you want to vote on things. And maybe now I would include you guys in that as well. And like, I think it's like, it's been cool to see like haters like that then be like, oh, sorry, I didn't know. And then they join the DAO, and now they're in the Telegram, like token gated channels with us, like weighing in on things. And like that, I think is how you fix the trust problem in media, not saying, oh, I'm not biased, because everyone is.
So we could buy the Caucus NFT and pass an order to require you to smile less, right?
You could, but I don't know how many people would outvote you.
I like your smile, so
thank you, Garrett.
Business idea. Like I would be very interested in buying a pass to like him joining the DAO if that meant that I like had access to the unedited file. Like I want to see what Do Kwon has to say like for himself, right? And I don't think that that should be platformed like publicly, but like I think that is like one of the cool things about putting your stuff behind a paywall is that like people already have context by crossing that paywall and like who you are and what you're doing.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, it's something that we floated to in terms of like, okay, should we just put everything like unedited? Because I mean, we shot for 2 full days, and so like
Yeah.
there is something there, and like that's kind of what we followed up with in a second piece, right? Because like we weren't sure how many like people were going to watch or how long they'd want to watch, and so like after we put the first one out, which again, like Coinage was coming from like a perspective of trying to do this for a mainstream audience. So we explained, like we spent the first 10 minutes of that piece, by the way, just explaining like what Terra was and how it worked. Where at the time when we put it out, there are people who like full well knew what it was and how it worked, including myself. And they're like, "Why are you wasting time on explaining this?" And it's like, because we're trying to speak to everybody who had never heard of this project before.
Yeah.
And like in crypto, people get so pigeonholed that sometimes it's like you need someone and a brand to like kind of bring them along. And that's what Coinage was originally trying to do is like if you're deep in the sauce, become a co-owner and steer the narrative because that's like what's powerful. And so like that's what's been cool to build. Like I said, I'm not an expert in everything, and I don't think anyone can be. But if you like tokenize a community around it and everyone has incentive alignment to like make sure we're right on things, like I don't think we can go wrong doing that. And so it's gotten like super it's gotten more interesting the longer we've built this. And like now we have an independent board that was elected, which is mostly like people who have been in the community for the last 3 years since we launched the Do Kwon episode. And it's just been really fun. And now I don't know what happens next. We got a meme coin. We can talk about that as we already did. It's just like Solana's a whole nother ecosystem that's floating around out there.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'd like to talk about next, because so I have a theory that like part of the reason that we are in the situation that we're in, which is part like what I'm referring to is partially like this extremely aggressive weird turn into like straight up like gambling and fraud and what I'll just sum up as meme coins. And then also like everyone is so tribal and at each other's throats and whatever is I believe that our community was organized around crypto Twitter and someone came in and like fundamentally changed the character like at the code level of crypto Twitter, and like the types of things that got like movement before are not the things that got movement now. And like in my time in crypto, I've seen like a pretty huge transformation of just like everything, but like vibes, the way people talk to each other, the way people think about other projects in the last 3 years, right? And I'm not asking you to make a judgment call on that, but I am asking you, like, how do you see crypto community and content and just like our public square evolving? Like, man, do you have eyes on TikTok? Like, should we be there? Like, how are you thinking about like, what does it mean to be an effective member of the community and content creator in 2025?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that like that was partially like what was so cool about talking to the Constitution DAO co-founder Graham, by the way, who's also a Coinage member. Like that's the difference between going for like quality over quantity, and like that's also why like it's an arbitrary number. All these NFT projects kind of pick an arbitrary number. Originally, we were like 10,000, and we're like, now let's shrink that down to 5. 5,000 is a more manageable community, and like so we essentially burned like half of the amount of like NFTs that Coinage will ever have, and now it's hard capped at 5,000 and 1,000. And like scarcity is a thing that like Bitcoin proved out. I think Bitcoin proved out like you need some level of scarcity to like march towards, but you also need to give yourself a sustainable path to get there.
Yep.
And so like I think what you're getting at is kind of like this idea of if a community gets too big or like too kind of like segmented, like can like the fabric fall apart. And like that's what we were discussing with like the Constitution DAO co-founder is like that was a really cool experiment back in the day because everyone was aligned, they got the same price, and it was a shared mission around like, hey, look, it's a simple goal. We want to buy a replica of the Constitution, and so let's pool $40 million and do it together. But it was like together is like the main thing. And I didn't care if the token went up or went down. I put $250 in because I just wanted to be a part of something. And so like in our first episode of launching our meme coin, which is now turning this experiment inwards on ourselves, is like, how can we replicate what they try to do in 21 today? And like how broken is where we're at now that like would anyone even care? And so like we launched this, the play button token, where like our experiment was like, let's fair launch it the same way Constitution DAO did. So like everyone can enter, everyone got the same price. What I didn't necessarily consider is, and they had the same thing, is they raised $40 million. We only raised we set a soft cap of like $6,000 to like bring in this. And then totally retweeted it and it blew up. And so it blew up in the way that like we didn't necessarily have like a hard cap in mind. And so like it's an arbitrary call. And even though like we crossed our soft cap, it was like, all right, this is now 190K that has come into this fair launch. And like we still have 13 hours to go. Like we can collect more money or we can cap it here. And so we decided to cap it there. And if you think about, again, going back to like GameStop and the idea of like IPOs and traditional markets and like what this all looks like. And like you have the SEC saying meme coins aren't securities now. And so like, all right, if they're not securities, then like, what is this space? And now there's like a real need for an experiment to show like, well, what is this space? But talk about it transparently. And so like, that's what we're trying to do with the series is like walk through step by step, which again is not me in the same way that like, it's been very weird to talk about like devs and like trust and like everything that crypto's built, because it's like essentially building tools to where you don't need to trust each other. But as time and time again shows, including the Doquan experiment, like everything else, is like it's still humans trusting each other at the end of the day, because it's humans using this technology either with each other together or against each other. And I think that's the thing that's shifted since Constitution DAO is like the trading on the chart has become like I'm trading against you. It's me dumping earlier than you. So like I make money and you lose. And like that's not how at least this is the experiment, and this is my like obviously we built Coinage the way we did on ETH as a community co-ownership. So like that's kind of like my mentality. But like I can't say meme coins are wrong either, because they've been able to like show like almost with stable coins and like Bitcoin, like those are some of the top use cases, arguably even more so than DAOs. And so like we're sitting there now as an ETH DAO, which I think this is hilarious, by the way. I would clip this. But like we built Coinage as an ETH DAO, right? Like one of the most, I don't know, we've been around for 3 years. People are talking about us. I'm on this show. So like, I'll give us some credit and say like, okay, maybe they're doing something right. And so like this ETH DAO has been established and just launched the largest Sol fair launch on Pink Sale in the last 2 months. And so it's kind of funny to me to think about an ETH DAO steering one of the most recently successful Solana meme coins. And so I don't know, that's an interesting experiment. And like, again, Coinage has these tokens. A lot of people are like, oh, Coinage has like a lot of the tokens in this thing, which again, we transparently said like 51% goes in the liquidity pool, 49% is owned by us. And like now the DAO is voting on like, what do we want to do with the money that we made in this fair launch? And like transparently talking about that. But like Coinage isn't sold, I haven't sold. And like, this is an experiment that we're playing out. And so like the token prices come down because people who got in the fair launch sold because they're like, oh, someone's going to dump on me. And I'm like, I get that, because like we're trying to build something differently. And like, can you build a meme coin differently if like it's been ingrained in people that like I'm going to get dumped on, I need to enter fast, exit fast. But like, what community has ever been built online by exiting fast or entering fast and exiting fast? And so like that, I think hopefully that answers your question, is that like I don't think you can build community that way. And so like it's an interesting experiment because we tried it and we tried to put it in, and like we've just started, by the way. Like I took the play button that we earned to the New York Stock Exchange on day 2. That hasn't come out on Yahoo Finance yet. Like we literally just started this thing. And so I think it's pretty funny to like look at now that like the token's out there and trading is like, well, where is the real value around what we're trying to build? And like, can there be a meme coin? And if you build the one that actually does work, maybe since the era of Dogecoin, like that would be pretty crazy. And so we'll see what happens with it, but it's an open experiment and the DAO's voting on like everything we're trying to do with it. So it's been pretty fun.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for you. And I think like what you're doing is like great. Like it's experimental, like who knows what value, if any, is going to come out of it. And like, I encourage that. I just like, you said like meme coins. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think I at least have to acknowledge like something wrong is happening with Pump.Fun, right? And
no,
like,
for sure. And to be clear, we didn't launch this on Pump Fun. I will say that. I would agree with you.
For me, like the moment it clicked that like there's something like actually wrong here was when the Bybit hacker bridged over a ton of value over to Solana and just yeeted it hundreds of millions at Pump.Fun coins. And like that first was like, oh my God, like what an interesting, clever, effective way to launder a ton of money. And then the next question is, wait, was this the whole point of Pump.Fun from the beginning?
Interesting.
And so like, I don't know, man, like I can't say I know one guy who actually got rich off of meme coins, and like good for him, man. But like all I see is just like devastation and like poor people who are desperate, who got rich, who want to get rich, and like rich people who like just took advantage of them, and now money laundering and like value extraction and like, dude, I'm
Well,
sorry, I'm anti meme coin.
no. I mean, I'm also anti meme coin. Look at the first sentence of our story, and it says, as a community-owned outlet that has rallied against meme coins, damage, like naturally, we're launching our own. And it's like we also hate meme coins, but it's like, how else will you experiment with this? And like,
no, fair, yeah.
it with where Tolly was responding to someone else in the ETH community, and he was like, "Well, there's a difference between price and value." And I'm like, what does that even mean? And so like that kind of started in my head like something interesting in terms of like, well, if you're entering the meme coin arena, you kind of know what you're getting into. At least that's the stance that the SEC is now taking with their whole like memo on meme coins, which is like, it's all fair game. It's not in our wheelhouse. And I think it's pretty interesting to think about what that opens in terms of like, okay, there's a call now for like experimentation in this space. And like, I almost feel like, I don't know, there's definite flipping in the way that like the SEC now with Hester Peirce, as we just like interviewed her today, like thinking about letting everyone kind of handle themselves, right? Like there is no nanny state. And so if you're buying a meme coin, you're getting into it because you know the risks and you're getting into it yourself. And I would kind of disagree. And like I challenge her on the stance of a little bit of that, because it's like, well, you can't still have all the games that happen in meme coins. And like now we're going through this ourselves where it's like, well, what do we want to do with the funds? And normally a lot of it, to your point, Rex, is like shenanigans that you're like trying to trick people into like buying this thing because number go up and then you rug pull everybody. It's like, okay, then how do you do it differently? And that's kind of what we're inviting everybody to be involved in. Is like, okay, can we do it differently and align community around the token at the very beginning to avoid this? And I think it'll be funny if like everyone, and we've seen these experiments before. Remember like the little kid dev that flipped everybody off and rugged them, and then the community like came in and like tried to pump the token well above like where it was. Like things like that are kind of funny to see play out in meme coin land. And like with this, we had a lot of people come in, buy the token in the fair launch, game it themselves, by the way, and like try to nuke our chart. And like there was some shenanigans that happened from like people before we even launched for trading. And it's funny to think about them coming in off of a Tolly tweet and then exiting. And now like potentially if we actually build this thing the way we want to build it to be like well above where they yeeted out of it. I don't know. I make no promises with this. It is an experiment. Coinage is liquidity in that liquidity pool. We've been transparent, locked for 100 days. And like now the DAO's voting on where we go. But I hear your point. Like I would agree with you. Meme coins, I would not have gone, and certainly Coinage didn't build on the meme coin mentality of like that's the way we're going to do our ownership. I am curious about like now that you guys have your own Squid token too, though. It's like similar. It's like how do you use like a token to value accrue to users? Like the tokenomics of all these projects are also very interesting. Like I would ask the question there too is like how do you guys think about the tokenomics? Because I think you do need like two levers to pull in terms of like value accrual and like a thing that you use for payments. And even Bitcoin learned this in El Salvador. It's like, okay, which way do you want to go? These are tricky questions for projects.
Yeah. I mean, Garrett, do you have any thoughts on that or?
Yeah, well, we could probably do a whole episode times 2 or 3 about like our thoughts for what we could do with the Squid token. And also like, to Zach's earlier point, like also want to be careful before doing that episode, talk to lawyers, make sure they're not going to say anything that's going to land me in prison. But the way that we think about it is a lot just in terms of like, I follow like MEV a lot, right? Like, and this question of like, how do you like decide who gets to go into what block is one of the most interesting questions in all of crypto. And I think it's the same problem we're trying to solve with news, which is like, there's a million stories that are coming across the radar. How does anyone get to decide what is at the kind of tip of that tip of the news blockchain, so to speak? It's an incredibly like complicated problem, and whoever is able to solve it is going like generate tremendous value. So I see Squid as the token that kind of lubricates this pipeline. And I think that's where it gets its value accrual from, is the ability to kind of control that kind of like MEV battle of attention that goes on at the tip of like what's happening in the world of crypto. So.
Yeah, and I just need to sing Garrett's praises for a second because I really wasn't involved in the Squid token. I mean, 2 years ago, that people were like, "Let's do point." Back during the point meta, we were joking around about Squid points, and then that turned into a token, and then it was just like, okay, like there's a smart contract on some blockchain, like what do we do with it? And then it's like, okay, well, what if we like issue it to people based on their participation, right? And like Okay, that's cool, right? Like we're not asking anybody to put a single dollar in, like we're just giving it away. And then the question is like, okay, how do you provide value to something that you're giving away? And like what I love about the direction that Garrett's taken this is less like about like let's like build a narrative and like get people hyped up about it and just try to like draw new cash in so that there's cash to take out. And it's much more about like let us let us do useful things in like whether it's like advertising here or like facilitate like a spot on someone else's show or whatever, but like let us put real utility behind Squid so that like people need to buy it in order to like do things on our show, and like that's where the value comes from. It's not like hyping people up, it's like people actually need to grab it, and so I think like to me that's like kind of why I'm like every day like showing up excited to talk to Garrett and be on podcasts and stuff, is because like again to where we kind of started this conversation is the Squid token is like how do we solve a real problem, which is like how do we choose the news, or how do we find the right advertisers, or how do we capture value from the advertisers, and like using it as a tool to facilitate that and not like the end in itself.
Well, it's a good full circle kind of moment from where we started, because it's like it's the same thing that Coinage is trying to do, right? In terms of, and again, coming from like journalism myself, is like trust in media being at an all-time low. Clearly, the model's broken. Like everyone knows the model's broken, but like very few people have like landed on a solution. And so like again, I give credit to you guys. I give credit to like anyone trying to solve this. And like for us too, it's like the same thing. It's like, okay, let's start with the ownership layer on ETH in terms of like anyone can buy an NFT and join our community. And now, similar with what you guys are trying to do, like can we have a token that also like is used more for like the payments piece, which is why we launched Play Button, in terms of, yes, it was to celebrate with our community, but now there's a currency that can be used like within the Coinage ecosystem, and kind of the same way. And so like I think there's a lot of crossover here anyway. It's like immediately once we finish this, I'm going to ask you about like the whole auction thing, because that's pretty cool to like integrate that way. And like which by the way, if you back up and you think about like even launching a token, like did you guys launch on like, I didn't see what chain it was on before, but like that's always like a decision.
It's on Fractal, but we were a big fan of Fractal. Check out the QR code, winner of last week's auction. Got the right to that. Big fan of Fractal, but we're also working on getting it on multiple chains. But we won't want to waste our time talking about Squid when we got like, because I can talk about that like the other 23 hours of the day. We got to Coinage here and just a few minutes left. I did want to like get your high level takeaways. You talked about it a bit, but you just interviewed Hester Peirce.
Yes.
And she's fantastic. I haven't got a chance to watch the interview yet, but like what were some of the takeaways you had from that? And I think you've had a few other interviews with her too.
Yeah, I've been interviewing her. I just reflected, I've been interviewing her since like 21 when she came on my show at Yahoo. Back then it was in the pandemic, and I think she took that interview in a car. And it's been fun. She joked around. She was like, well, yeah, I took the first interview with you in the back seat, and now I'm in the driver's seat, as she's like now head of
spicy.
And I was like, okay, all right, Commissioner Peirce, well done. And so, yeah, so like, I think it's been great to get to know her over the years. First of all, like she's, most of our interviews have been when she's like not in power. And so it's always been like, hey, how wrong is this? How wrong is this going on right now? And now it's kind of fun because this is the first interview that we've gotten to have with her in the seat as the head of the crypto task force. But again, now it's weird because like, as a journalist, you kind of always play devil's advocate. And we were kind of like playing the same team of like, hey, how wrong is like Gary Gensler's anti-crypto approach, right? But now that she's at the head of the crypto task force, and Rex, you and I just had this conversation around meme coins. It's like, what are the potential unintended consequences of what's happening now? Which is now you have an administration that is taking most of the lead from like the crypto industry itself, which means Coinbase is leading the charge on like writing policy. And like, does that help retail? Does potentially the SEC saying meme coins are all good? Like, does that help retail? If like, I don't know. And so like we got into a little bit of this now that she's more in charge. Like, does that change the way that even we at Coinage should be covering these? And like the interview got somewhat spicy. So I would say check it out. You can check it out. It's going to be up on the YouTube channel as soon as I jump off. But right now it's on Coinage.media for people to watch ad-free with a subscription token. But yeah, it's been cool to like get her take on all these things. And I think based on where the interview ended, again, we're trying to do this transparently here in the US. We started this project in 22 as a Colorado co-op. So like, I think, we made a bet that eventually the US would come around to like, hey, maybe we should help people instead of suing them every 5 minutes. And like Stoner Cats got sued right when we were kicking off. And like again, I understand where a lot of the issues were. Like it's a hot take, but like Gary Gensler wasn't completely wrong all the
No,
time.
dude,
I
I'm
mean,
totally with you.
he was
Yeah.
wrong most of the time, sure, and like certainly lied about a lot of things about crypto. But like there are necessary consumer protections in this space. And like we're learning that even with the meme coin now is like people do some shady shit. And like we don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
so it's a tricky thing. And everyone likes to be very like, hey, one way or the other, but like nothing is that easy. And
Yeah.
so it was fun to get her thoughts. So I would say
Mm.
if people are interested in going deep, Hester Peirce is a great guest to have on.
Yeah. No, man, I feel you. And honestly, I'm not pro Gary, like, but I'm not against him. And like maybe I like could quibble with some of him tactics. Maybe I don't know about like some actually like very illegal thing he did, whatever. But like the idea that someone came in and was like, this is a fucking mess, and I'm not actually sure if there's any value here that is not scams and money laundering, like that doesn't make you evil. That makes you like a rational thinker when you actually like look around, you know? And like he came aggressive, and it was our job to like show him that he was wrong, you know? And like
Yeah, I think on the flip side, though, there are a lot of pieces of things where definitely like in Congress as Coinage flag, this one blew up too, and like he along with some others were like it was crypto that brought down Silicon Valley Bank. It was like crypto that was the problem with like signature and like all this stuff, and it's like we're learning more now that it's definitely not that case, and it's like for him to say that in a congressional hearing is like pretty crazy because it's like the day after the New York State financial regulator came out and was like, literally the next day in Congress said everything that Gary Gensler just said yesterday is factually incorrect, and it was like kind
yeah,
of an eye-opening moment for us to be like, whoa. And so like
yeah,
things like that on the margin, there are certainly some things where like again, this is politics, and I'm learning that
yeah,
too. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
people are loose and goosing with the facts
yeah.
sometimes, and like they got their own agendas, and so like
No, and I don't mean to quibble with you on like who's a good guy or who's not, but the idea that like Gary Gensler was like the ogre who was coming to like crush like our beautiful shining city on a hill is just like not coming to terms with like what is happening in our
I'll give
industry.
you an example to prove your point too, because like that's what we asked Hester about is like, okay, look at what's happened with meme coins, right? Like as the
Mhm,
shenanigans have progressed, and like again, it's not too dissimilar from what happened with Gary Gensler because he essentially
mhm.
like said meme coins are fine,
Yeah,
and like
yeah,
then you had a proliferation of meme coins because it was the only thing that was like fine to do because he wasn't going after meme coin projects, and so then you get pump fun, and
yeah,
so like it's very interesting to think about now that the SEC has come out and basically said essentially just like codified the same thing that Gary Gensler was already doing. But like,
yeah,
look at what's happened with the projects on meme coin land. Like, liquidity's dried up. Like, no one wants to participate. Like, investor confidence has fallen apart. And so
yeah,
my challenge to Hester Peirce was like, okay, look, like you're kind of continuing the same thing. Is there a fear that unintended consequences here could potentially like Gary Gensler was very strict about like keeping crypto over here and not letting it touch the financial system. But like now we're in that arena. Like Trump is connecting the dots and like we're all mixed in now, or we're going to be very quickly. And it's like, what happens to capital formation in the US if you have the same thing that just played out in meme coins where like all the rules and regulations are gone and scams galore? Like if that happens in traditional markets, there's a huge problem forming. And so like it's not easy, and I don't envy Hester Peirce now to be in charge and like potentially like there for some of this stuff because these are hard questions. But like that's what I worry about as like a
dude.
journalist who's covered the space from both sides, from traditional markets now in crypto. It's like, uh-oh. And like we saw it with BlockFi and we saw it with Celsius, and like we didn't get bailed out then, but like what happens when you plug in a
Yep.
system that is all about don't bail us out into a system that loves taking risk and getting bailed out? Like, do you want
And
that?
and you put the president's name on a coin too, right? Like, like if anyone's gonna get bailed out, he will. So anyway,
I'm just saying. I'm worried.
yeah,
I'm worried
yeah.
sometimes. Welcome to
No, Zach,
crypto. Yeah.
we know you got yeah, we know you got a hard stop. So I just want to thank you and thank you for leaving us on like the perfect teaser. I'm literally adding that interview with Hester Peirce on my playlist right now because I need to know her answer to that question you just posed.
Thank you guys, and thank you for having me on. And congrats on everything you're building. We're loving the Leviathan stuff in our Telegram as well, and love sharing stories and getting them posted through your guys' channels too. So thank you for having me on, and congrats again, Garrett, Rex. Thank you guys for the time. Appreciate you having me on.
Of
All
course,
right,
man.
squids. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll catch you all in the next tide.